Good morning, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com. I don't know if you saw that. I know it's awkward, but my little counter goes back from 0 to 1 and then starts over again, so I'm not sure what's going on. So I just wait a second or two. This is Brian Neubert once again from goldenblack.com, live here at the Palace. This is your goldenblack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast for Tuesday, May 26th, the day after Memorial Day. We appreciate all of you joining us. Not that some of you have a choice because we just pop up on your computer sometimes. But this is brought to you by Fox Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters team Remax Ability Plus. Want to remind you once again, as some of our restaurant friends phase out of this, hopefully, period of extreme difficulty, would like to ask you to keep in mind the 6th Street Dive, East End Grill, Arnie's, Bruno's, the Whitaker Inn, and Triple X. All of them, at the very least, are open for carryout orders, I believe. Some of them are phasing into regular seating once again, but please keep them in mind if you want a hell of a dinner or simply to support our local businesses. So if you visited goldenblack.com this morning, you saw our entrance interview with Purdue basketball incoming guard Ethan Morton this afternoon. I think, hopefully, I'm doing the same with Jaden Ivy to post later this week or next week or some such thing. That brought to mind simply the topic of Purdue's guard play next season, because I think those two freshmen, could be pretty impactful guys. So I figured I would use this opportunity to just simply talk about guard play for Purdue basketball next season. I don't know if I've talked about that yet. If I have, through these last 6 months or 8 months or 10 years of doing this, my apologies. I think, Travion Williams is a huge deal for Purdue next season. I think he's going to wield a level of influence on Purdue's team, sort of like Carson Edwards did with the team before this past one. That might be a little bit overstatement. But I think Travion Williams is obviously, if there's any one individual who is most going to influence Purdue's outcomes next season, it's going to be Travion Williams. But that being said, Purdue's guard play has to go from one level to another next season. And I think, logic suggests, both in terms of the ability of the players coming back, the ability of the players coming in, and the simple progression of time, it is a very reasonable expectation that will occur. I think what you want to see from Purdue next season is, and I don't mean this as a slight, I mean this as a nod to the process. All due respect to the Philadelphia 76ers, whose trademark I just infringed upon, I think. More mature guard play. I think, Purdue played some guys in expanded roles, prominent roles, huge minutes, really for the first time in their careers last season. And while Purdue collectively, probably couldn't be classified as a young team, I do think it was a new team. And I think, you saw that to a certain extent in the backcourt, especially. I think now some of the inconsistencies from last season need to parlay themselves into consistencies this season. I think you want to look for a group of guards who are a little bit more assertive, a little bit more confident, a little bit more wanting of the ball in their hands, if that makes any sense. And I think that is something players grow into. I think that's always the case, and I think that should be the case next season for Purdue. You want to see a more aggressive group of guards. One of the overlooked aspects of last season for Purdue offensively was its ability to execute its offense, and its offense is relatively intricate in terms of its many ball screen situations, the many dribble handoffs, things like that, the actions that Purdue puts its guards in. And what you need those guards to do to make that operate at an optimal level is you need assertive, aggressive guards carrying out their assignments within that offense. What you saw the year before in Carson Edwards sprinting 1,000 miles an hour off screens without the ball in his hands, running plays, that was a special offensive player who played the game at a special speed doing that. But you want that level of effort, of that level of tenacity in those guys from an offensive perspective. Sasha Stefanovic was probably the one guy who obviously busted his ass to run the plays that were called for him. And at some point in time during the season, he kind of became that guy that defenses really kind of went after. I can think of a couple examples where defenses converged on him at the apex of his route, so to speak, on the play they were running for him, and just took him away. I think when you look at Purdue's results last season, they correlated pretty well with his shooting, and I think there came a point in time during the season, Penn State and Mackey Arena was a really good example. Rutgers was another good example, where they just wanted to take him away. I know he had a good game against Rutgers in that season finale, but he was a marked man in some of those games. I'm thinking there's another game. There was a couple of examples where defenses clearly just sold out to take him away. I know Penn State was one, and I'm trying to think who the other one was. I just mentioned Rutgers off the top of my head. I'm not sure that was entirely accurate. But he kind of became the temperature gauge for Purdue, where if you took him away or did everything you could to take him away, Purdue felt it. And I think next year what you need is a more balanced sort of deal. And I think they will have it. I think Eric Hunter is going to be a really good college player. I think he's going to be a very, very good, very, very solid, very, very high floor sort of college player. He did some very positive things last season in his first season with the ball in his hands a ton. I think he did some really positive things defensively, especially early. I think he's still got a ways to go there. But he's a guy who's going to score for you, but he's a guy who can play that combo guard position, do a lot of different things, play off the ball, play on the ball, and just be a good, solid, all-around college basketball player. I think you're going to see him take a big jump from one year to the next. This season, I think Sasha Stefanovic probably is pretty close to his ceiling as a player, but you can always get a little bit better here and there. Experience will make him better. As I said before, his effort, running plays without the ball in his hands was pretty damn good. I think that there's obviously some room for him to still grow. Experience will matter there. I don't know if he's ever going to become, much bigger, stronger, faster, quicker, more athletic, but he's a pretty good weapon as is. And if he gets a little bit of help around him to where maybe he doesn't get focused on as much, there might be some growth in that alone. I think Isaiah Thompson is an easy guy to overlook because he was the only freshman who played last season. You have a couple of prominent freshmen coming in next season behind him, on top of a couple of experienced returnees in Eric Hunter and Sasha Stefanovic. He's kind of that man in the middle, kind of a little bit easy to overlook, but I think he's another guy who's got a lot of upside. You saw a certain fearlessness in him at times offensively, and that was the sort of thing I thought Purdue really needed at times. That being said, he has to grow into some stuff too. There were some games where people got physical with him and whatnot, and might have thrown him off a little bit from a defensive perspective. There's room to grow there, but he made big shots at Indiana. He had that little run at Michigan that really helped put Purdue in a position where it really probably should have won that game at the end had it got one more defensive stop here and there. Travion Williams' heroic performance would have been enough to win that game. But I think Isaiah Thompson's a guy who is going to be a really good three-point shooter in time, a guy who can create his own shot, a guy who can pull up, a guy who can do a little bit off the dribble, a guy who can change ends very quickly. And that's when Purdue, had some of its most offensive success this season, when its guards were pushing the ball up the floor, going quick. That was a backhanded compliment because they struggled in half-court offense. Their best bet was to go quick. But Isaiah Thompson gives you a little bit of extra gear in that mode. I think he can have that kind of combo guard quality to him too, where he can play a little, traditional point guard sort of situations. That makes a lot of sense. Good job. But I think he can be a very good player as well, and don't overlook him. So those are three guards right there who I think, coming back, are better players next season than they were this season simply because they've played. That's really important. What you want to see from those three guys especially, you want to see them guard because Purdue is coming back right now with a lot of defensive questions, and it's always been this way under Matt Painter, but that starts in the backcourt. You've got to set a tone defensively in the backcourt. That puts a tremendous onus, I think, on Eric Hunter, who's largely going to be guarding on the ball. That's always been a pressure point for Purdue defensively, but I think Sasha Stefanovic is a guy who is already working really hard at it, has some natural limitations, but he will want to, you know, improve however you can during this non-traditional offseason at the defensive end. I think Isaiah Thompson's a guy, too, who, impressed Purdue defensively last summer because they were expecting something very different than what they saw. I do think there's some real room for growth there. He's a guy who his quickness can really make him somebody you can turn to on the ball as well. But also, Purdue is going to need its freshmen to come in and guard, and it's going to need its freshmen to come in and make an impact. Nevertheless, even if Eric Hunter, Sasha Stefanovic, and Isaiah Thompson come back next season as entirely different, profoundly better players than they did this season, I think Jaden Ivy, Ethan Morton, and Brandon Newman all have prominent places on this team sitting here waiting for them. Jaden Ivy, if you followed our coverage of recruiting in the past 18 months, you are probably aware of my opinions of Jaden Ivy. I think he's a potential star. I hate to say that before a kid has even shown up on a campus, but I think he is as good and as well-rounded a backcourt scorer probably as Purdue has signed, and I don't take that comment lightly because E'Twaun Moore was special, Carson Edwards was special. Jaden Ivey's different from those guys. I think he's a little bit quicker, a little more athletic than E'Twaun Moore. I think he's a little bit more well-rounded than Carson Edwards at this stage. I think he's a guy who can score in a ton of different ways. He's not as explosive as Carson Edwards. He's not the shooter Carson Edwards was. He's not the physical force Carson Edwards was, but I think he's a little bit of a combination between E'Twaun Moore and Carson Edwards. And once again, I don't take that comparison lightly because I do understand what I'm saying there. But I do think he's a good shooter. He's a good pull-up shooter. He will be an adequate three-point shooter. I think he's really good in ball screen actions. I think he's quick. I think he's explosive. I think he plays the game fast. I think he's really fast in the open floor. I think he's special around the rim. He has a knack for navigating traffic around the basket and putting the ball in said basket through defenses. I just think he's a really, really gifted offensive basketball player. Defense is going to be a huge adjustment for him. I think structure, is always an adjustment for all of these freshmen, learning the offense, learning roles, things like that. But he's also another one of these combo guard sorts of guys who you can put the ball in his hands and let him do some things. Again, I think he's really good in ball screens because he can get downhill really quickly, but I think he can also handle the ball and pass and make decisions. And I just think he's a perfect fit for what Purdue does offensively. Ethan Morton, I think, is a perfect fit for Purdue. I think I've always compared him, and I know this is a really counterintuitive comparison because he's only like 6 inches taller. I've always compared him a little bit to P.J. Thompson because I think he's a guy who's an excellent passer who just wants to make everyone around him better. And I think, Matt Painter's best offenses, not that this is unique to Purdue, but Matt Painter's best offenses have been the ones that have been really good at moving the ball, really good at making decisions, really good at taking care of the basketball. And I think that's exactly what Ethan Morton is. He is offensive lubricant, WD-40 for college basketball offense, if you will. And I just think that's what made P.J. Thompson such a winner at Purdue. And I think Ethan Morton naturally has that. People look at him as an elite passer and they say, oh, he's going to come in here and set assist records. This isn't an assist offense. This isn't an assist program. This is a decision-making program. This is a ball movement program. And when you have a guy wired like Ethan Morton is reputed to be wired, that is a really, really good thing. I think he's a guy who probably long-term is one of your back-end options offensively in the best-case scenario because you will have weapons around him. A guy who's not going to look to get his before he looks to give other people theirs. But is a guy who, as a scorer, will pick his spots long-term. He says he really needs to work on his shooting. I don't know what his standard for himself is, but everything I've ever heard about him and seen from him is that he's an adequate shooter, as is a guy who, is just going to be asked probably to make the open shot every now and then when it comes his way, which he should be more than capable of doing one day, I would think. Brandon Newman, I've always compared Brandon Newman to DJ Bird. I know that's another counterintuitive sort of comparison fairly obvious reasons. But I think Brandon Newman is probably more of a guard than a forward, whereas DJ Bird was more of a forward than a guard. They both, or at least DJ Bird was more of a forward, period, but he had guard skills. I think Brandon Newman is kind of has a real body to him, like a front court sort of player, but he's definitely a guard. I think Brandon Newman gives Purdue another off the ball shooting threat. You can't have enough shooting threats. That is what has brought Purdue to this point after the success it's had the last 6 or 7 years. Really, really skilled offensive basketball teams. You can't have enough shooters. Brandon Newman was regarded as one of the best shooters in his class. I'd imagine during a redshirt year, he has not forgotten how to shoot. He has a very similar form to me to DJ Bird. That's another part of the reason I make that little comparison. Brandon Newman should be a really good defensive player too off the ball. I think he's really competitive. He works at defense by everything I've understood and seen. He's got the body for it. Lateral quickness might not exactly be his thing necessarily, but he's big and strong and he tries hard, and that's a really good start. So that's where the DJ Bird comparison probably goes out the window, because the bird flies out the window. So, and because I'd imagine DJ Bird would probably be the first to tell you he probably wasn't an elite defensive player at Purdue. Brandon Newman, I'm not saying he's going to be an elite defensive player, but I think he'll hold up his end of the bargain. Long story short here, I think Purdue has really good options in its backcourt. Obviously, some unproven guys, some guys who have to get better from last season, some guys who haven't played yet. But at the very least, what you have here is you have significant competition, which is a very good thing, because you didn't necessarily have it last season as much. I think that's good for everybody. I think the experienced guys now, if they haven't improved from one season to the next, there's no guarantee, that they're playing as many minutes next season as they were this past season. Because again, Jaden Ivy and Ethan Morton are really good, and Brandon Newman might be really good as well. So Purdue's in a really good spot, with or without Nojel Eastern, who I haven't even been factoring into Purdue's guard equation, even when he was on Purdue's team, because I didn't think he was going to play guard. I'd never really even looked at him as a guard, period, because he didn't do very many guard-like things. Wasn't necessarily asked to be Chris Paul from an offensive perspective. I don't really think Nojel Eastern's departure affects Purdue's backcourt outlook at all that much, outside of defense. I think, you would have loved to have had him as that kind of eraser on another team's best perimeter scorer. Now somebody's got to step up. Somebody's got to establish themselves as that guy. Who is that going to be? The most likely candidate would be Eric Hunter. I think he's better on the ball than he'd be on a, say, Joe Wieskamp or Romeo Langford, somebody like that. Some of those guys that Purdue has been able to sick Nojel Eastern on the last couple of years. But Purdue's got some real questions to answer in its backcourt defensively. It's got some real questions to answer all over the floor defensively. The front court, the backcourt alike. So, but Purdue's got really good options. I think on paper, in its backcourt, it's now a matter of the guys coming back, showing that they've made a step from one year to the next, and it's a matter of the new guys coming in, living up. If both of those things happen, you're in a pretty good spot here. So that's what I've got on Purdue's backcourt situation. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This has been your goldenblack.com Daily Quarantine Simulcast for Tuesday, May 26th. We will talk to you again tomorrow, Wednesday. Believe this is probably our last week doing this. We'll kind of play it by ear, but I am running out of things to talk about, and you are probably getting really sick of looking at me every morning. So this has been brought to you by Fox Purdue Bookstores, Purdue Federal Credit Union, the 6th Street Dive Restaurant, First Source Bank, East End Grill, and the Charters Team Remax Ability Plus. I want to remind you once again, for a hell of a dinner or to simply support our local businesses through the back end of this very difficult time in their histories, please keep in mind the 6th Street Dive in Lafayette, East End Grill in Lafayette, Arnie's in Lafayette, West Lafayette, and all over the state, Bruno's on the Levee in West Lafayette, the Whitaker In-Out in West Lafayette, and Triple X. If you don't know where Triple X is, you've never been to Purdue's campus. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you tomorrow.